And thank you everybody for joining us today. So today we're going to be talking about is why it's time to make the move to BIM. So if you haven't done it yet, more likely you have a couple of reasons. And what we're going to look to do today is show you why now is the time. So what we're going to be doing is going over just some basic things. So number one, what is BIM? Why people are actually moving to BIM, like what its value is, why it's adding to the benefit of the industry and just in general. Some of the software that's actually being used, and focusing a little bit on some of the tools that are the latest things to come out and how it's really bringing everything together. And a lot of these tools just weren't available when people were starting to move into BIM. After that, we're going to talk a little bit about how you can actually get started with this. A couple of different best practices and some links to helpful resources and information. So that way when you leave here, if you want to do a little bit more research, if you want to actually make that jump, you'll know where to start. So first thing, what is BIM? BIM is an intelligent model-based process. Now, the big thing here is not to focus on the model portion here. So BIM when it first started, BIM stood for Building Information Modeling. Myself and a lot of other people feel that BIM actually stands for Building Information Management now, because people are using that model for multiple things. What are we managing? Are we managing design? Are we managing the construction? Are we managing our facility or our building? So the real part of this is the information, and what BIM really is a process. There's not any one specific program or software that is BIM. So there's a lot of BIM applicable or BIM based tools that work within this process. Main thing with this process is to make sure that we're not losing our data. So when you look at this image here, what we tend to have is sort of a life cycle of a building or a project. We're starting off in the planning phase. We move on to design, we're going into building, then we're managing our building. And then at some point, more than likely, we're going to have additions or changes to that building. So we start the whole thing over again. The main thing with this, though, is that we're not having to redo our work over and over again. And all the things that we do are accurate because they're coordinated. They're actionable because we can actually track what has happened, and we can schedule things and tie the data that's inside there, that information, to different elements. And it's accessible. We're not just locking things into one program now. We're able to pull that data out and utilize it in multiple places. Whether that place is a physical place, meaning I can access it in my office, your office, and on the web, or it's a place in terms of a program. What I've done in one program can tie on. So if you start off a design in schematic design, you take it through to DD, CDs, CA, building management, you're not having to redo your work over and over again. Now, how BIM is different than CAD? Well, easiest way to look at this is, well, what is CAD? CAD is computer-aided design or drafting or documentation. And in many ways, it didn't change the way people worked. What you really were doing was still drafting the way you had previously on the boards. You just were doing it on a computer. And the benefit of the computer was it could speed things up. You could manage changes very fast. So you have to delete things or draw a bunch of lines. You didn't have to worry about, sharpening your lead or finding things like that, or putting on sticky backs. You would just bring it in that way. But there really wasn't a big shift in how we worked. BIM allows us to make a much needed shift in the way that we actually collaborate. It allows us to get much more insight into the work that we do, because again, things aren't sort of held over into little corners or little pockets of information. It's much more coordinated and collaborated. And again, that information is accessible and computable. I can actually track different things like productivity with this. Now, benefits of BIM. Excuse me. In a nutshell, we're going to have more efficient workflows, partially because of the benefit of the way that the software actually works within this process. We're going to find that we actually have a greater predictability. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to know exactly how long projects are going to take. What we're talking in terms of predictability is in our designs. So when you actually create a building, one of the things that you tend to look at is anecdotal evidence or, project experience on, okay, we want it to do this because then the light will do this. Or I'm going to put a air handling unit here because it's going to power it this way. When I say predictability, I'm talking about we know exactly what's going to happen because we can now analyze our designs. We can ensure that, okay, if I put a building here and with this kind of glazing, I can actually see what it's going to do to the building across the street. It's actually going to raise their heat, or it's going to cause too much glare. We can do that kind of an analysis with our tools. And doing that kind of work, will actually give us improved project outcomes. So we're actually going to understand what's happening. We're going to be able to take all these benefits and move that down the line, meaning that the main recipient of a lot of this is the owner. They're going to have a building that they can now manage much more easily. They'll understand what the benefits of that are. And in terms of creating this, our decision-making process is streamlined. So we're not just guessing at, I think this will do this. I can say, well, I've run the analysis, I've done these things, and based on some of my tools that actually automate the process, I ran through 30 different options in a day, and I know this will happen. Now, in terms of what it's going to allow me to do, again, that simulation and the very quick way to visualize our work. So that way I can actually show pretty pictures if I need to. I can show informative pictures if I need to. I can coordinate and collaborate all of my data with as many people as I feel I need to. And I'm not holding on to this or hoarding all my information. I'm able to share it and work with other people. And based on that, I can actually create processes that are smarter and in some cases more intelligent, because I'm not working on an island. I'm making sure that my process is not having to recreate work. I'm building on what I did previously as opposed to starting over. And I'm making sure that I work with other people so that way there's less of a chance that my work and their work are not coordinated or are causing clashes or problems. Because the last thing you actually want to deal with is finding out that you have a $60,000 change order just because one little thing got missed. Now from this, me talking about benefits is one thing. Having numbers that can back this up in many ways are much more powerful. So what we're looking at now is some information from the 2012 Smart Market Report. So this is from the business value of BIM in North America. So what we're looking at is some of the short-term as well as long-term benefits. So they captured this both in 2009 as well as in 2012. And you can see that a lot of people were actually tracking, okay, well, what did we find that we were benefiting from now versus later? And a lot of it comes from, number one, maintaining repeat business. That's a long-term goal because you're able to deliver a better product to your clients. And in many cases, you either have word of mouth or they're just going to keep coming back to you whenever there's changes. And part of the reason for that is you're able to reduce project duration. You have fewer claims or litigation, like I mentioned before, with change orders. Your construction cost can actually go down. And based on that, you have reduced issues and errors. Now, one of the last ones there is staff recruitment and retention. I'll touch on that a little bit more later on, but that's actually a very big thing. Now, when I show slides like this, a lot of times people say, well, yeah, but that doesn't work for my industry. If you actually look at this, these kind of surveys, this kind of data is not specific to any one person. It's not like, oh, BIM is great, but it really only works for architects. Or, you know what, it's only really good for civil, or only just for the owner. They're finding this is a benefit to pretty much everybody across the board. So some disciplines like architects are a little bit further ahead because they've been using it longer. You're finding that the owners are finding that this is really good because they're latching onto it very quickly. They're progressing very fast, the ones that are really jumping on board with it. And this is not just a thing in the US. If we're looking at it in the US specifically, this is the level of BIM adoption that they found. So it's almost growing exponential. We're going from 28% to about 50%, and we're almost at 3/4 of the industry. So it is growing. People are actually doing this, and it's helping them. And in terms of the entire world, USA is one of the ones that's definitely in the lead. Australia is very close behind us. In some cases, they might be a little bit ahead of us for how they're using BIM. But this is not just us. This is everywhere. And over the next 2 years, what they feel is that contractors expect that the work that they're doing is going to increase by 50% when using BIM. So, and this isn't the actual, construction managers. This is talking about the contractors. And we're actually seeing it ourselves on the projects that we work with our clients. Now, in terms of why some people might be moving to BIM, a lot of it comes down to mandates. What we're actually looking right now is a sort of atlas or map of the world, and those little dots represent locations where they already have in place certain mandates or requirements on BIM deliverables. So many countries overall have actually started to have requirements for it. The UK has a specification going in, I believe it's on 2016 or 2015, that are going to require government projects to actually be utilizing a certain level of BIM information or workflow. We're seeing this as well in a lot of locations in the US, more on either a state or by a government piece by piece location. So you've got the New York City Department of Building that are not requiring BIM yet, but they've actually put the work in to allow for BIM deliverables for submissions. You've got the New York City, New Jersey Port Authority, Caltrans, Boston Transit, or sorry, Mass Transit. So there's a lot of places now that are putting together their mandates for it, and that's also helping drive this. Now, in terms of some business factors, a lot of people will look at this and they're really focused on their own aspect, and that makes sense because each person on part of the chain of the project, they're going to look at it from their standpoint. Contractors tend to find that their productivity goes up and their project costs lower. One of the things is some people are actually finding that their insurance costs can be a little bit lower because they're actually doing more checking in the process. They're having less time of people up on ladders based on scheduling things appropriately. They're also able to do this by having certain things be designed a specific way. Architects have, most of the time when you see an architect, if you give them an extra week on a project, they're not going to finish early. They're going to spend that extra week doing more work, trying to make a better product. Most architects tend to see their return on investment not as a means of finishing earlier, but as a means of delivering a better project, has higher quality. They've reviewed more options. And based on that benefit from both the contractors and the architects, the owners tend to recognize benefits as a better project outcome. I just want to let you know I am seeing the questions come in. I'm going to make sure I touch on all those near the end. Now, for business factors, when we start to look at the actual organization, one of the big things, if we look at this from a project standpoint, we're looking at things like a reduction in waste and risk. And some of that also can benefit other aspects of a project, like if you're going for lead. We're looking at different things for different people, but a lot of this comes in from the regulatory, comes in from benefit of communication, and you'll see a large amount of these are focusing on errors. So the old process wasn't necessarily a bad one. The problem was it made it harder to do what we needed to do in terms of coordination. You might have, 200 sheets that you have to go through, and you're going back and forth between them to make sure that things aren't running into each other. It's just a lot easier when you're working with not only just a model, but a model that has information in it to help you understand what's happening. Now, when we're looking at this from a standpoint of a firm, one of the benefits with BIM software is that you're going to find that you might have opportunities with new clients that you didn't have before, people that are requiring BIM. Now you can actually meet their needs. You can expand the services that you're doing without actually needing to add more time or personnel for this. So what we see with a lot of clients is, well, if you're doing presentation, what would you do? They might be sending it overseas, or they might offload that work. The benefit of doing this as a 3D model is if they are still having other people do their presentations, now they can give them a model to start with, so that price goes down. Or they already got the model, they already have the ability to render it, they keep it in-house, so they're able to give more services for them. And again, you'll see employee retention. Giving people tools that are enable them to do their job better, have more of a chance for being creative and having ownership of what they're doing, usually tends to make an employee happy. Now, at this point, what we've been doing is looking at some of the benefits of it, how people are using it. What we're going to start to look at now is just a handful of tools that are, some of them have been around for a little bit, but based on the features that are in there, you're going to find that you can do a lot more with them. And it's not bleeding edge anymore. They've actually been around for a little bit. They've been developed, but the coordination is there. What you're going to find is BIM actually does give you opportunities. So first thing we're looking at here is a program called Navisworks. One of the benefits of this is that you can actually bring files from just about anywhere. So if I'm using Revit, somebody else is using AutoCAD, another person's using something different, I can still pull all that data together. If you're working in an existing conditions location, which at this point, a lot of projects actually are. So you're not making brand new buildings, you're renovating existing. Well, there's a tool called ReCap that allows me to work with the reality capture of the world. So I can actually manage and maintain and make sure that my designs work in the built environment. And then from there, I have a thing called point layout. Point layout allows me to make sure that that work and that design that I did and I coordinated in Navisworks, and then I looked at the real world environment in ReCap, I can make sure that the locations that I have designated in my design are actually transmitted to the correct location in the real world. And if I sort of take one step further back away from the building and look at this more from an urban landscape, I have something called InfraWorks. And that allows me to very quickly take all the information I have, not just from my building, but from my overall site, and actually present and work and analyze that. And what we're finding is that the transition to BIM is not insurmountable. It's not the same challenge that it had been in the years past. And let me show you what I mean. Now, if we're looking at quantification, a lot of people who actually have done estimating probably are very familiar with this image. So you got a set of drawings, some highlighters, and a scale and a calculator. Now, if you're actually using the computer to do this, you're still kind of doing the exact same workflow. Just like I mentioned with CAD, the process didn't really change. The tools that you use changed. What we're looking to do is actually change the process and make it much more intelligent and much more user-friendly. So by doing this in Navisworks, I mentioned before, I can pull my models in from just about anything. Doesn't matter where it came from. I can actually automate some of my process, so that way I'm actually using my model, and as well as taking advantage of 2D documentation. It's not just the model, but I can actually get intelligent estimates on the materials. So I can actually build all that right into that. And this is something that it's been around a little bit here and there, but again, it's much more fully developed. It's easy to hop into, and because it's not tied to any one set of documentation, I can use it with models coming from MicroStation, AutoCAD, Revit, doesn't matter. Now, construction locations with point layout. Now, this is one of those comical things where when you look at it, it's kind of hilarious. It's also kind of sad. Most people have actually worked on a project where something was put in the wrong location. And at that point, it's either a change order or you're trying to figure out what went wrong along the line. Setting things up to actually be in the correct location, a lot of the times it's done like this. You're laying things out in the field. You've got your wood, you got your string, and you got either some powder or you got some spray paint. Not exactly the most dead-on accurate thing in the world. What we're looking at is a method of making sure that locations that have been designed are placed exactly where they need to be. So if you're making boreholes in concrete, you want to put them in the right location before we pour, as opposed to having to cut everything after the fact. You don't exactly want to have to move them after you've poured. Point layout allows me to use lasers and GPS to ensure that the locations that we have designed and designated in our projects are put in the exact right location in the field the first time. So again, we're looking at coordinating, we're looking at communicating, we're looking at making sure that all of the work that I've put in, I only have to put in once. I don't want to have to redo this 15 times in 15 different programs. This is enabling me to take my design from whatever I did it in, coordinate it in Navisworks, check my points back and forth from Navis to the field, and I can actually see my model in the field as well. Again, improving my QC and reducing time of construction and errors. Now, from there, if we're looking at the actual renovation work, or reality capture is the term that seems to be throwing around a lot lately. Reality capture is basically taking existing conditions and putting it digital. So it's not unlike what we used to have to do with some sketch paper and where we would draw out what we see and then put all of our measurements on there. More often than not, though, what would happen is you'd be out there, you take your measurements, you get back to the office and start drawing it, and you realize there's a measurement that you didn't take, that now you have to go out there, or you have to guess, or you have to hope you won't need it. When we're looking at things with ReCap, what we tend to end up seeing is we're working with things that are built on photos. So you're literally building a full 3D model based on photography, or you're taking it off of a laser scan. And ReCap allows me to work with that laser scan, get dimensions, put comments, get information, and clean it up to bring it into either my documentation tools like Revit or AutoCAD, or into my coordination tools like Navisworks or InfraWorks. So that way I can actually make sure that not only is my building in the right location, but am I going to have clashes with the reality capture of a building that's adjacent, or piping, or equipment. Doesn't matter what it is. If I have it in here, I can work with it and coordinate with it. Now, the tools that I just talked about were mostly focused on coordinating with the design in terms of the building. And for those of you who know Navisworks, you realize that you can bring all the different programs together under that to actually review and coordinate with it. What you might not have heard of is a program called InfraWorks. InfraWorks is to the site and urban design or infrastructure as Navisworks is to the building and construction. So think of it, you're looking at it just from a little bit further back. But like Navisworks, I can bring in all of these different programs, whether it's Civil 3D, Revit, AutoCAD, 3D Max Design, GIS, Esri data. I can bring all that together. And what that allows me to do is, number one, bring it all together so I can very quickly do design. So if you've ever had to do a civil design, it's not exactly the most user-friendly or streamlined thing. Now imagine taking a full city plan and you drawing roads and buildings in there with the same speed and flexibility as SketchUp. That's InfraWorks. Now once you have that, you also have the ability to very quickly lay out presentations and do analysis. So I can actually see where things are, like show me where the floodplains are, show me where my slopes are. All that data is in there. And then with that, I can make very high quality presentation stills. I can save videos. I can put this data on a mobile device, and I can actually use that mobile device to view it with augmented reality. Meaning that if I actually go out to the site and I have a GPS connection, I can walk the site and look through that screen and see the model as it would appear in the real world. Again, these are new tools. These are tools that work within the BIM workflow. I'm not having to redo my work at every single step of the way, and it's an easy method to step into as opposed to before where you might have had to go crazy creating everything. Now, speaking of creating everything, how do you actually get started? So we've looked at this, we've gone over some of the benefits, some of the newer tools that are available. What do you need to actually do to get going? Well, the framework for this is, number one, vision, leadership, incremental change, and finding a pilot project. Now, in terms of vision, what I mean by that is you want to have a goal, and you want to make sure that that is articulated and understood by everyone on the team. So it's not like, well, what are we doing with BIM? Oh, okay, well, we're doing it for renderings. Oh, okay, well, we're doing it for facility management. You want to make sure that there's a clear plan in place and it's understood and laid out. You want to designate leadership so that way everybody understands what their role is. And if there's questions or problems, they know who they need to go to talk to work out any issues. And the incremental change is very important. This isn't going to be an overnight thing. For people that are working on projects that are nervous about jumping into BIM, if they ever worked by hand, easiest thing to do is remember, when you switched from drawing by hand and you went to working on a computer, you didn't do it overnight. You still would draw on the prints. You would still put sticky backs on there. You actually worked part way until you got completely integrated. It's the same thing. You want to have a good plan that lays things out, but doesn't bite off too much in the first shot. And if you can pick a good project, something that, if possible, doesn't make things too crazy, you're set. Now, in terms of picking that project, what you want to do is, number one, again, set those goals and objectives. So easiest thing to do is look at, okay, well, what do we need to do? So if we're looking at this from, say, a building, what we need to do is I need to have my floor plans and my schedules together. That's the easiest thing to do. You know, walls, doors, windows, and plan. It would be awesome if we could have our elevations done. It would be great if we can do our wall sections. So depending on where you are, look at every single phase and every single milestone. How are we doing? Are we on track to do what we need to do? Are we on track to do what we'd like to do? And you want to have a lot of communication. BIM is a workflow, it's a process, and the tools in that process will help you along. But that doesn't mean that you don't have to talk to each other anymore. In some cases, you want to communicate even more. Now, as part of those processes, the image on the right might look pretty confusing. If you look in the upper right, you have an idea of an entire project. What this is actually showing is a breakdown of a very complex site and how the model, in this case we're looking at the breakdown of the locations of the site, how it's actually broken down so that everyone on the team understands, okay, well, if I'm looking for this, it's here. This is over there. And then you would actually break down, okay, what the information is. You would have the requirements for the project, internal requirements, procedures in terms of collaborating with other people. And all of this data tends to be in something called a BIM Project Execution Plan, or a BEP. This is something that most people either actually create themselves or they get from other people and then edit to suit their needs. But this is something that typically is brought up in the very beginning of a BIM project to ensure that everybody on the project is on the same page and most importantly, understands what their goals and requirements are. So that way, 3 months into their project, someone's not saying, well, wait a minute, you said you were doing this in BIM. I expected this. BIM can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. You want to make sure that what you say and what you promise is explicit. Now from there, we're talking about the different people. And if you have problems, who do you go to? Well, part of this is looking at the roles on a BIM project. Some things will actually change. A lot of this is going to depend on the size of the project and also the size of your project team. But if you can lay things out so people know, okay, who manages our models? So who's going to be part of ensuring that everybody who's supposed to send me their work or their backgrounds, they send them, and that they're done correctly, and that they're laid out correctly, and that they're in the right location. Again, this is going to fluctuate depending on the size of the firm and project, but you still want to make sure that everybody understands what their role is and what they're expected to do. Now, when we start looking at standards, this was one of the big gaps for people to get over. And when I say gaps, I don't mean it was hard. I mean, most companies have been in business for quite a long time. And over that time, they've built up very good standards. And some of them are actually being followed. But the thing is, if you've been working in CAD for a while, you've got existing sheets, existing symbols, existing details. And the worry was that if you're moving into Revit, all of that is going to get thrown away. Or now I got to spend 3 weeks just building it all back up again. In all honesty, you really don't. We're going to talk about this in a couple of minutes, but a lot of these standards are already created by other people, so you don't have to recreate the wheel for yourself. We were talking before about BIM mandates. Well, a lot of the places that mandate the usage of BIM, they actually will provide standards. I mentioned the New York City Department of Buildings. As part of allowing people to submit BIM documents, one of the things that they're actually doing is they uploaded content for people to utilize to streamline that process and to help get them moving on the path forward, so that they wouldn't have to shoulder the burden of creating that content themselves. And we're going to show a couple of examples of places where you can actually look at that content. But having standards and making sure that they're followed is very important. And in terms of generating those standards, in terms of setting yourself up on the path forward, it's very important to make sure that you have support. That support could be something as simple as just getting training on the software, so that way you're not starting off and having a poor foundation to build off of. It could be as simple as creating workflow assessments, making sure that the plans that you have work out and that the things that you've promised to the client are achievable within the time frame and the skill level that you currently have. One of the things that we at Microdesk have actually been focused on for quite a long time now is working with our clients, putting together a business plan. So where do you want to be in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? Putting together a roadmap to achieve that, and ensuring that all the steps of the way are being done correctly to benefit not only your clients, but also to protect you and your workflow. And this is one of the things that we really feel we excel at, and we've actually been working on a lot. But it's important to make sure that you have somebody to sort of back you up and make sure you're on the right path. And just for a little bit more research, these are some of the places that have actually published guidebooks or standards that you can take a look at. So you've got the National BIM Standard. AIA has an IPD guide. IPD means Integrated Project Development. So think of it this way. If you're going to say you're giving me a BIM model, what does that mean? Some people means, I'm getting 3D. Other people feel that it's going to have a lot of data and intelligence in all of the elements. So because there's that difference of understanding or expectation, that E202 guide spells everything out. So this is what a level of design or development means. This is what I would expect for my walls, what I would expect for my mechanical systems. So again, make sure that everybody's on the same page and understands what the deliverables are going to be from each person on that project. And just a little bit more information here. This slide I'll leave up for a minute, and also there was a question earlier about this being recorded. Yes, it actually is going to be recorded, and it will be published on our YouTube channel. So that way you can actually see these links a little bit slower there. But these are just some of the locations where you can actually download and review the BIM guidelines and either use them as your own or modify them as a starting point. Very similar to how things started off with CAD standards. A lot of people would either just start their own, or they would take it from the AIA and tweak it to meet their specific workflow. Now, in terms of additional data, they just want to do a little bit of research. So these are some places where you can go to find more information about BIM. So you got the Autodesk BIM deployment guides. We at Microdesk, we have a lot of different articles and what's new topics and frequently asked questions regarding BIM. Augie is a great resource, as well as the BIM forum. There's a lot of good presentations that your peers have probably actually presented that you can pull from. And then bim.construction.com has some good information up there in terms of articles. So what do we look at? We went over what is BIM. And again, BIM is not a single file. It's not a single program. It is a process. The software and the tools that we utilize enable us to actually make sure that we're on this process correctly, and that excuse me, and that the work that we're doing is benefiting everybody in the flow. So if I have a great program and it really only helps the architect and it makes life harder for everybody else, that's not really a BIM workflow or a BIM process. Now, with a lot of the tools that we're looking at, they tend to be a value add. The work that I put in is not lost. So if I put in a certain effort in a different phase of the project, that effort can then be realized or built upon in later phases or by other people within the same phase. And the technology is not what you remember it being a few years ago. It's a lot more flexible, it's a lot more user-friendly, and it actually is made to coordinate with other people and other programs. And in terms of how to get started, you can always end up working with other people. You can give us a ring, we'll be glad to help you out, and you can look at some of the data that's online to start putting together your own work plans.